Hello Moto family, this is Moto Mike, and today I'm going to be running through a few details about upgrading your motorcycle. And this video is based off of a carbureted motorcycle, not for fuel injected. Okay, because I've had a lot of questions, and there's always questions on Facebook and everything as well about how do I upgrade, what do I upgrade, what do I do to get more power in my motor. So this video is going to be covering the basics on some of those upgrades and the stuff that I've done to my motor. Okay, first thing I'm going to talk about, and I'm sorry I don't have examples here right now of these, but we'll start with ignition. And first thing off is the basics of every engine, combustion engine, is based off of fire, fuel, and air. Okay, so those three things combined is what makes the engine, combustion engine, operate. Okay, so the more fire you can get mixed with more air and more fuel makes you more power. Okay, so those are the basics. If you're trying to understand engines for the first time and trying to figure out how to get more power, you need to first know the basics of a combustion engine. Okay, so when you toy with your motor, these are the things that you need to work on in order to upgrade and get better performance out of your engine. Okay, so a lot of the misconceptions is if you upgrade, let's say, your fire or your combustion, then your engine's good. But you didn't change the fuel ratio and the air ratio, you just changed your ignition source. Is that going to give you more power? It's going to give you a little bit better, cleaner response because you have more ignition, so you can burn more fuel and more air. But that source alone it's not enough. It's like the pieces of a puzzle. If you have the pieces to a puzzle, but you're missing, 20 pieces of your puzzle, it's not going to be complete. You have to do every component because one component of an engine counteracts and works well with the other part. So if you are going to upgrade your motor, I strongly advise that you do all the components. So yes, it's going to get more expensive. Do you have to do them all at the same time? No, you can do piece by piece. Okay, so again, back to ignition. I don't have an ignition coil with me right now. I have my new ignition coil is on my bike. I couldn't find the old stock ignition coil, so I apologize about that. So I don't have an example, but we're going to talk about it because it's significantly one of the first pieces to upgrade. So your stock engine comes with the stock ignition coil. Okay, and the ignition coil, what that does is that is what produces enough electricity or fire to make the engine combust, to ignite the fuel. Okay, so higher response time is because your ignition coil is strong enough to burn, because you're going to want to put more fuel. So if you have more fuel, you're going to want to make more fire to burn that fuel. Okay, so your ignition coil is one of the first things you want to upgrade and put a new ignition coil. That's number one. Okay, number two is your spark plug. There's many different spark plugs on the market, and I don't represent any particular brand, but your iridium spark plugs tend to be a higher quality spark plug and get you more hotter fire for response on that. Okay, so now you have ignition coil and your spark plug to work simultaneously to get that fire injected into the engine in order to ignite all the fuel that you're going to use. Okay, so then with that you have this here. This is your fuel filter. This is my old stock plastic fuel filter, and as you can see on mine, the fuel filter itself is very small, and it's just doing the basics that it needs to do. And but it's also was restricting a lot of fuel flow. So when I was doing my upgrades, I wasn't able to get enough fuel through this fuel filter to equal the response that my engine wanted. So I upgraded my fuel filter to a full metal fuel filter with no restriction for racing. Okay, so that's one little piece that people don't think about to upgrade, is upgrade your fuel filter so you get more fuel into there, into the engine. Okay, so then with that, you also have your air filter. Okay, your basic stock fuel filter, again, is restricting so much air, and it's fine with everything stock. But again, you're talking about upgrading. When you upgrade some, again, like I said, you need to continue the process from start to finish. So you need to upgrade your fuel filter to get more airflow to go inside. As you can see, the hole is much larger. And of course, the hole here, your size, is going to depend on what size carburetor you're using. Okay? So upgrade your fuel filter so there's no restriction on airflow, because you want as much air to go inside the engine as possible as well. Okay? So change your air filter out. Okay. Now we're down to the carburetor. This is the heart of the engine. Okay? This is where the gas and the air is going to go inside, and it's going to go from here and be put inside of the engine to actually combust and make the engine run. Okay? Now this is just an example. This is a 42 millimeter carburetor. It's quite a large carburetor, but for an example, you know, this is what we're going to use here. And so on the bottom here is your fuel reservoir. Okay? It's going to hold fuel in here that runs the engine. So it's going to be able to drink the gas from the bottom and where your float and everything else is at to go inside the engine. So this must remain full while the engine is operating. Now, if your engine is using more fuel than you can put in the reservoir, that's what I mean you're going to have a problem. So that's why I changed my fuel filter to make sure I didn't run out of fuel in my reservoir, and so that way my bike doesn't start cutting out, because it will. Because when I changed to the big carb and started running everything, well, now my big carb is using more fuel, but my fuel line was still restricting to a same amount. So that's why I had to change the fuel filter as well. So now that way I could make sure I got enough fuel inside of my carburetor to make it work. Okay, and inside you have the different jettings. Okay, so one jetting that's on the top is your needle jet. Okay, you can see the needle jet here, and that's one of your jettings. And there's different settings on here to allow more fuel. So depending on how your carburetor runs, lean or rich, you're going to have to adjust your needle jet in order to get the adequate response out of your carburetor. Okay, so, and the rule of thumb is always run your bike a little rich. Never run the bike lean, because you're going to burn up your engine. If it runs a little bit rich, it's not going to do damage. But if you run too lean, then it's going to overheat your engine and destroy your block and your piston. Okay? Here's are the jets from the bottom. And that's your main jet and your pilot jet. Okay? And the three jets, they control from idle to running idle, mid-range, and high-end, the top end. Okay? So changing those three jets will change the response to your carburetor and your ultimate goal. Okay, so if your throttle is running rough, change your pilot jet, okay? If your top end's not right, change your needle jetting, okay? And so on. So, those are the basic components of your carburetor. And again, that's where your air filter's going to be able to go on to here to run and make sure there's plenty of air flowing through, along with changing your fuel filter so there's enough gas, okay? So now we've covered that changing ignition coil and spark plug to make the fire response for ignition, okay? Air filter so that you get more airflow in. And then change your carburetor to a larger carburetor so it can actually be able to take in enough air, enough gas to boost up your power. Because again, we need more fire, more air, and more gas, okay? Now, once those have gone inside to the head, then it's going to run the block, okay? And you can see here, this is the block off of my Z200X that I had before, and it's not stock size now. It's bored out larger here because I was working on trying to bore it and get it bigger, but I didn't break it in correctly, and so I burnt it up. But anyway, so now we have the difference on power and why some of the bikes, like for instance the Suzuki Raider bike, is so fast, but yet the CCs is 150. My Z200X is 200 CCs. So a lot of people look at the motor and they wonder why the Raider 150 is 150 CCs and it's so fast, and it's hard to beat it with the Z200, but it's 200 CCs. Okay, first off, the CCs is the displacement. Okay, so the displacement is, if you have your piston here, we'll find the piston that fits, there we go. You have the piston inside. The volume inside your cylinder from the top to your piston at rest, you fill it up, that's the CCs, okay? So that's the displacement. How many CCs fills that void, okay? And the reason why this is a 200 cc and the 150 cc on the Raider bike, it's smaller, is because the volume inside. And here's why. On this block, on the Z200s, okay, it's a long stroke, okay? Stroke is the length from the top of the cylinder all the way down that the piston travels, okay? Going up and down vertically, this is your stroke. Bore is the circumference around your cylinder this way, okay? So stroke is going up and down. Your bore is the circumference around your block cylinder this way, okay? And this is important because the bore here on the Raider stock Suzuki Raider bike is larger than the Z200. But the reason the CC is smaller is because the stroke on the Raider is shorter. So it's like this. It's not so long. That's why the volume inside, it says the CCs is less, because technically it is. The displacement is shorter. It's a short stroke engine. Okay? So you're wondering now, how come, if it's a shorter stroke, why is it so strong and so fast? Okay, the reason is, like your Formula One race cars and your top end race cars are short stroke. Okay, when it's short stroke, the piston here, it has less distance to travel inside to go up and down. Okay, the distance is half. So the RPMs are very high. Okay, so if the piston has less distance to travel, say just only like this instead of all the way up and down, it can get more RPMs. Okay, higher RPMs, higher torque, higher power. Okay, so it doesn't have to travel as far. So it can get more rotations to boost more power. Hence why the Suzuki Raider has a 6th gear. Because its RPMs are so high being a short stroke, it needs the 6th gear, otherwise it's gonna blow the engine by too high RPMs, okay? So this is the key secret why the power is stronger, even though the displacement is 150 versus 200. Because big bore, short stroke, okay? So the CC displacement doesn't always be the dead giveaway, okay? You can design the engine to where it's less CCs, but more horsepower, okay? So now we also going to go into, that's the block, and we discussed the stroke versus the bore, okay? So, and again, what you want ultimately, even if you have a long stroke, you can get more power. You just need a bigger bore, okay? Bigger bore means more surface area, which is this here on top of the piston. When you have bigger piston and more surface area, okay, when the ignition and the explosion happens on top to push the piston back down, then you have a bigger combustion because you have more surface area to ignite, okay? So hence, the bigger your bore, the bigger your piston, the more power you're gonna get thrusted down, okay? You know, it's basic physics, like the difference between, you know, a bomb from an aircraft versus a firecracker, right? The bigger the explosion, you know, the more power you're going to get generated from that, okay? So now we have those pieces, and now these here are some of my pistons that I've used, okay? You can see a little bit of difference here. You got, you know, different heights on them. You've got different valve pockets that were created inside. This was just me playing around and you know, trying different things on my bike. This is my stock piston before. As you can see, it's black on top. It's a brand new one, didn't even get used because it didn't work. But they're sized between 63.5 stock piston all the way up to 67 millimeter piston, which I kept boring out to try to get bigger. Now, also, if you bore out your block, it's recommended that you don't go more than 0.5 millimeters, okay? Because here's what happens. If you're gonna go larger than that, change the size of your block. Because if you shave too much, and this one got thin already, but if you look here, you see how thin the cylinder is. What happens is it's too prone to overheat, okay? Because the wall's too thin that it can't absorb the temperature, so the heat's gonna come out of the cylinder and it's gonna warp your cylinder, and then you're just gonna have problems over again. It won't work. You know, especially if you're going long distance and stuff like that. So again, realize the more you upgrade your bike, the less durable it's gonna be for traveling long periods of time, okay? So a lot of these are set up, you know, if you're trying to just race and go for, you know, a short time, a lot of these applications are gonna affect your long distance riding on long hauls, okay? So, now with that said, another upgrade that I did when you're starting to get past some of the basic stuff and you get more deeper into the engine, okay, is this. Okay, what this here is, this is my stock camshaft. Okay, you see it? Cover up my face here. Okay, this is the stock camshaft. This is important on the camshaft because even you upgraded everything else. You upgraded your carb, you know, you got your block and your piston set, you got your fuel, you have everything set up, you got, you know, your air. So you got your air and your gas, everything going to the engine, okay? But your valves that are sitting up here above your piston that are going in and out, you know, mine's only 2 valves. It's not a 4-valve bike. So I have 1 valve here for gas and air to enter, and I have 1 valve for the exhaust to come out. Okay, so even you upgraded everything else, and because you're trying to get more air and more gas inside your engine, this is what controls the valves. So this is what opens up the valves only that high. So even you upgraded the other stuff, your valves are still constantly keeping the same amount of gas and air going inside, because it's only opening the same distance. Okay? Does that make sense? This controls your valve heights. And your height is what allows so much gas and air and exhaust to come in and go out. So by upgrading this, I upgraded to stage 1 racing cam, which is on mine as a 7.7 millimeter. So it changes the height of your node right here, so your valve opens for a longer period of time, a larger amount. So you can see that's important, because even you upgrade everything else, your valves won't let it come in. Hence why I was saying if you start with 1, you need to continue the process to cover all your bases, because you kind of lose if you upgrade everything, but then you don't change this. You're still keeping the same gas and the same air inside. No matter what else you did, the valves are still keeping the same amount to go in. So this is the camshaft. Again, I went to stage 1 racing cam shaft, and there are higher stages, stage 2, stage 3 that I know of, and maybe a stage 4 that I'm not currently aware of. But that's one of the important parts. Then another one that's the most basic, and probably the first thing everybody does on changing your motor, is your sprockets. And I didn't bring an example of the front sprocket, but these are a 32 teeth sprocket and a 45 teeth sprocket. Okay? Now, the reason for changing the sprocket, okay, is it's going to change your speed ratio. Okay? So this 32 will give you higher top end speed, but your low end torque pull off the line speed will be much slower. So again, depending on what you're looking for and what your desired outcome is on your motor, depends on what your sprocket change is. Okay? And again, if you make it a smaller rear sprocket, then your RPMs are going to be lower range. Okay? So it's going to let you climb for a lot longer, but you're going to lose that takeoff momentum. It takes you a while to boost your speed. So once you start getting to the mid-range, then your motor will keep accelerating farther. Okay? Now, whereas this big 45 sprocket here, this one will give you max torque off the line, but your top end speed will be less. But also be careful, because I made the mistake of using this one, that your RPMs on top end range are going to be much higher, so it's going to put way more stress on your piston, your block, and your engine. Okay, so if you're racing and you are maxing out your engine, it will max out faster on a big sprocket on top end and put way more stress on your piston and your block and have chances of overheating and stuff like that. So, but if you're, driving in town and need to overtake and you want to have that immediate response and you don't really need the top end speed, then a big sprocket's the way to go. And a lot of people are asking also on these sprocket changes, well, what sprocket do I use? They're always asking, what's the perfect setup for a sprocket? Okay? All these items that I have showed you so far on upgrades are universal. They're all the same. So it doesn't depend on the rider on those upgrades. But just like MotoGP racing and everything else, there are certain parts about your upgrades that you need to do based on you, the rider, okay? And this is one of them, okay? Because everyone's asking, what's that magic number? You know, what size the front, what size the rear should I change to have the best outcome, okay? Well, again, that setup is based off of your driving capabilities and your weight, okay? Because a lighter rider that weighs less can use a smaller sprocket and get great outcome. But a heavier rider using the same setup with the same sprockets will not achieve the same thing, because of course weight kills. So smaller rider can use smaller sprocket because he doesn't weigh that much. If you weigh a little bit more, you might want to go with a little bit larger sprocket, because you're going to get that torque pull that you need in order to pull the weight. Okay, so again, you're going to need to play around and try different teeth sizes for yourself, because there's not a one size fits all on sprocket sizes. Okay, so you know, those are some basic things that, you know, if you're looking to upgrade like I did, on things that you can do. But again, I just want to, you know, inform you that the price to do complete setup from start to finish can be quite costly. Okay, so before you get involved into it, just realize that once you start, you're in it, and that, you know, piece by piece, you know, the time and the energy and the money spent is going to build up, but it's going to be worth it, okay? Because you're going to get, you know, quite a bit more performance out of your bike. Okay? So again, maraming salamat po. And thank you very much to everybody for watching. And don't forget, click and subscribe on my channel, hit the like button, and leave me any comments and concerns that you might have, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. All right, talk to you later.